Today we have two guests. I believe I'm turning on the microphone for Dr. David Gruder. Are you there, sir?
I am here.
Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Is Laurie's area code 858?
Yes.
All right. Turning on the microphone for Laurie Morse. Laurie Morse and David Gruder are a husband and wife couple based in San Diego, California. They co-host the One Thing podcast. Both are best-selling authors who are deeply versed in a wide range of traditions that teach versions of what has been called perennial wisdom. Their calling is to equip individuals, couples, leaders, and influencers to transcend from Homo sapiens into Homo spiritus, human spirits who act as conduits for higher love and wisdom to catalyze the co-creation of heaven on earth. Laurie is a master health mentor and licensed acupuncturist who directs the Sacred Health Academy. Dr. David is an integrative psychologist who directs the Center for Enlightened Self-Sovereignty. They are also co-developing a Sacred Partners Academy. This is for couples and business partners who are committed to embodying Homo spiritus consciousness in their relationship and in what they co-create together. Welcome, David and Laurie.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
I was prompted to ask you to join us today because of listening to the One Thing podcast, specifically the one on evil. And there were just so many overlapping themes that we talk about and similarities in the work we're doing that I thought, if they're willing, let's get these two people on MindShifters Radio to talk about their particular take on all the things that MindShifters Radio tries to promote and teach and work with.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for agreeing to be here.
Of course.
Our pleasure. Take it away. We're happy to talk about anything that is of interest to your listeners.
100%.
Well, you know, one of the things that you did in that particular episode, and I let Dr. David know that I had listened to several of them, but in that particular episode about evil, the themes that resonate so clearly are the work that's done on MindShifters Radio and in the MindShifter support groups and with the Reality Management Worksheet. This is work that's informed by translation work from the oldest known copy of the New Testament, directly from the ancient Aramaic into English. And in that work, there are definitions for words like sin that are very similar to what you talk about. It means energy that's off the mark. And evil, meaning what is unripe. There are two fundamental meanings for the word evil from the ancient Aramaic. One is unripe, and the other one is way off target. So if you're shooting at the target and you miss the bullseye, the scorekeeper might yell sin. You're not on target, readjust and take another shot. If you miss the target altogether, they would yell evil. So it isn't this moral issue. It isn't somebody with a red suit, a tail, and a pitchfork running around outside of us, seducing people. It is energy that's off the mark, and it's the other ancient Aramaic word, or the root of the word Satan, is satah, which means to slide, fall, or cut off. And it essentially is an individual cut off from themselves, or in denial of some part of themselves, or the full definition Dr. Michael Rice likes to use is Satan. The definition from the ancient Aramaic is the resistor, one who misleads. And you talked about almost all of these things in your episode on evil, and how important it is to recognize that it's just energy misapplied or misdirected. And the last thing I'll bring up is that David was talking about it. It makes me think that David has read the book People of the Lie. Is that a familiar book to you?
very familiar to me.
By the author of The Road Less Traveled. So this idea that I, as a human being, just a normal, average, normal, everyday human being, will only do evil things as I'm running away from my own pain, fear, or sadness that I just don't feel equipped or willing to deal with.
Yes.
So,
well,
take it away.
Sure. Well, before we plunge into this, I just want to honor and acknowledge that what you were saying about the overlaps between the understandings from the Aramaic version of the Old Testament and what Laurie and I are saying about evil. It's a reflection of what you mentioned about us embracing perennial wisdom, that there are certain wisdom teachings that cut across most, if not all, of the main spiritually oriented traditions around the world, and this is no exception. So I just wanted to frame our discussion of this around that broader picture. Laurie, do you want to weigh in on this first? Or?
Well, I have a lot of things to say.
We both do.
Yeah.
That's why we asked
honey,
you.
Why don't you go, because I don't know if you were wanting to springboard off the people of the lie, and then I can weigh in after you.
Sure. Well, what I will say about People of the Lie is that I read this book. It's by M. Scott Peck, so you're right, Tim. Same author as the classic
The
book,
Road Less
Traveled. And I loved the People of the Lie book because Scott Peck was one of the few psychologists who had the courage to tackle the psychological dimensions of evil at that time. And I was just really thrilled about that. And what I've noticed is that since he wrote that book, which was in, the 1980s, 1990s, somewhere in that time frame, I haven't seen other books from psychologists on evil. And I think it's a hot potato in the psychology field, speaking as a recovering psychologist myself. And I'm sure you can verify that too, Tim, that in psychology, we don't talk about evil enough. Would you agree with that, Tim?
Absolutely. And that there are, hot potato topics that unless you're courageous and willing to suffer the slings and arrows, you just stay away from them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so before I turn this over to you, Laurie, the framing that I want to offer around this notion of being unripe and way off target is that I think important to that discussion has to do with motivation, because there are things that I refer to as loving mistakes, where I have a loving intention and a mistaken expression, and the mistaken expression of that loving intention ends up being off target or way off target sometimes. There are expressions of evil that are actually unconsciously overdriven by a wound structure that basically even vetoes loving mistakes, where we're driven to have negative impact because of our own unfinished business. And then there is evil that is intentionally motivated, where the person is intending to do harm on a conscious level. So I think it's important to distinguish between those three manifestations of what we're calling evil. Laurie?
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I assume, you correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, that most of the mind shifters are good-hearted people looking to shift their energy to be more in alignment with life than not, versus choosing to be evil, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. So I love all the things you said about the translation work, and so I'm going to riff off of that and sort of create what I believe evil to be something that's hidden in plain sight to try to get all of our attentions, for good. And that's the idea that the meaning of Satan is being cut off. So I see our original wound as human beings, the disconnection from the source of all life. And what we call that, is less important than that we call it something, whether it's source or spirit or higher wisdom or, the universe. And it's exquisitely important that we relate to that energy, that consciousness, that higher presence of life as deeply personal and universal, right? And I think a lot of people miss the two sides of that coin. And I love what you said about the meaning of evil being unripe, because the big lie, if we want to talk about lies, is that we drop into this maze. Let's just call it a matrix. Others have called it a matrix. And there's a lot of programmed beliefs in this matrix. And what if our purpose of life is to walk ourselves around this matrix, this maze, if you will, and it's a treasure hunt in order to discover, that which is beyond the lie, right? That we're worthy, we're whole, we are, we can't be in this body and having this earthly experience without being connected to something that's greater than us. And that the work, the shift for our minds is to literally walk our humanity, our Homo sapiens self, into our Homo spiritus self, or our divinity, or our sacred self, and to close that gap. And then that creates energy that is more in alignment than off the mark. And I believe that our, what we're seeing in the world, the division, the hate, the war, they're projections of our own consciousness. And I think that evil is often thought of as something so terrible and so not us that we put it in this category and we kind of turn our back to it and close our eyes and go on about our business. And we did say this in the podcast, it's my understanding that evil is nothing more than energy that's been built up, and that it's our invitation to just do our own work around that which is dark energy, right? Shadow energy, if you will. And we have everything we need. We have all the capacity we need. Okay, maybe we have to look for support and techniques and ways to do that, but it's possible, and people don't believe it's possible. So I'm wanting to really put forth a strong invitation to listeners that not only is it possible, it's our job.
Mm-hmm. And I want to piggyback on, lots of what you said, but specifically about projection, which is that the seduction of projection, especially when people are looking on individuals or actions that they judge to be evil. The seduction of projection is that oftentimes when we see quote-unquote evil out in the world, it's not because we've made it up out of whole cloth. That may be going on out there, but the seduction is to focus on that external evil as a way of sidestepping, dealing with our own off-target energy. And that's where it becomes really problematic, because I have found over and over again that when I'm dealing with someone who is off-target, whether intentionally or unintentionally or loving mistake, doesn't even matter. When I'm dealing with someone who's off-target, and I am triggered by their off-targetness, I actually accelerate the evil dynamic. And when I am untriggered by their off-targetness, I can respond with love, with either the divine masculine version of love, which is challenging without shaming, or the divine feminine version of love, which is nurturing without indulging.
And one of the things you said in your podcast that really, hit home for me and is right in line with everything we talk about in this work is that when you recognize you're having an internal negative response and your mind is telling you that it's because of this person outside of you who's doing something you judge as evil or off the mark, you have learned to turn to the one thing, what you were calling the one thing, and ask to see it a different way. Ask to transform that energy rather than indulge your own energy of being off the mark and generating negativity or hatred or condemnation.
Mm-hmm. Exactly,
well,
Tim. And this is...
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, sweetie.
Oh, I was just going to share my favorite four-letter word in this situation, which is help. It's that surrender. It's that humble acknowledgement that my ego, my seemingly separated version of self, does not know how to see this situation or how to respond from a place of love. And the word help for me is my reminder to reconnect with the one thing so I can be a conduit of higher love and wisdom in responding to a particular person or situation. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, if there's a million things we could all be triggered about. We're not all triggered about the same things, but when we get triggered about whatever it is, whether it's a person or a circumstance happening in the world, then that's just our piece to clean up. And it's pretty constant. You know, I agree there's tenacious work here to do, but I also believe that those of us who are here on the planet, chose to be here at this point in time in order to do the work. That's why I'm pretty bold about saying it's my job, and I see it as any human being's job as well to do that work. When we turn to the one thing and sort of surrender, I guess, and become receptive to what else might be going on or how to tend to the piece that's in our face in the moment, that's where the magic happens. And it's my deep opinion, it's not even an opinion, it's a knowing, that there isn't really a way to do the work on the planet without that. Like, we've tried. We've tried for thousands of years, and all we do is keep churning the same energy over and over, and okay, now we're in the 21st century, and it looks the way it looks, and we say it's so terrible, but they were saying that 2,000 years ago, too. So it's like, when are we going to sort of, be willing to try it a different way?
And I think what we're talking about here is something that is very precious, I know, to both Laurie and me, and it's basically spiritual self-responsibility, that I and only I am responsible for whether I react to a person or situation, whether, an undesired or even unacceptable situation in a triggered way, or if I respond through connection with the one thing.
Yes.
That is exactly the core of what we've been working with most recently in 2022, and now again here in 2024. We're reading through The Way of Mastery, and that's what it's all about. 100% responsibility for the creation of your experience of life, which is the product of where you focus your consciousness. And, Laurie, you were saying that something about how it may need to happen over and over again. The Way of Mastery calls us to be willing to do this prior to every breath.
Right.
Reconnect and
beautiful.
ask for help. The primary thing is, right in the first lesson, it says, please pay attention. This is the way of the heart we're talking about. And the way of the heart is not the way of the intellect, right? And the intellect is like a garbage can shoved full of trivialities from your culture and your language, and the heart is what you need to step into. So the invitation with the Way of Mastery is, learn an entirely different way to engage your life. You've been trained to do it with your intellect, what Einstein called the faithful servant, and the precious gift, the intuitive mind, the creative mind. We're living in a culture that's forgotten that. And perhaps worse than that, it's elevated the faithful servant or the useful tool to the level of master. And Way of Mastery says we have to be the actual opposite of that. And you have to ask to be shown. Like Rilke would call us to learn to live in the question without demanding an answer. We need to stay in that open questioning space and ask to be shown. every time something less than love arises in our consciousness.
Yes. You know, Tim, I'm really so happy that you brought the heart in, because I was thinking about it just before you did. And it's, you know, Chinese medicine has taught me a lot. I'm a practitioner of Chinese medicine, so I've learned a lot. And one of the many things is that consciousness is in the heart. And of course now heart math has lots of research that backs that up. But our true consciousness, our Shen, our highest life, our most precious life force, the life force that is the monarch of any human being, is in the heart. And truly, there's that line, the longest journey is between the head and the heart. There's also this idea of a three-part energy in the heart, and it's love, wisdom, and power. And not, we have a funny relationship with power now, which is either there's an abuse of power, which we've been watching for quite a long time, or there's an abdication of power. But power just means right action. Making the choice at that nanosecond choice point before every breath. And we our consciousness, we're designed to be good directors of our energy, and that's where free will comes in, right? Where we make the choice before every breath to include our heart in whatever it is that we're doing. That's being a good energy director or a good manager of our energy. And I just think that that's a practice that but many people are being called to, and I love that you guys are studying it in MindShifters, because it's a path, and it's a sacred path.
Yeah. And, did you want to say something before I chime in, Tim?
No, go ahead, David.
Okay. Just to riff on this a little bit more, intellect is either the boss of me in the form of ego, limiting beliefs, wound structure, or intellect is the servant of my heart consciousness, which is connected to the one thing. So, what I don't want to get lost in translation here is that I don't want to see the intellect be villainized, because all that the intellect is a tool. And if we elevate a tool to being the boss of us, then the tail's wagging the dog. The intellect, my intellect, is a really useful part of me when it is in service to my heart consciousness. And then the other thing I want to add about the triple flame of love, wisdom, and power is also a further illumination of power from that transcendent perspective, which is about right action and impact. So yes, I agree with you, Laurie. The word power has gotten a bad rap for understandable reasons because of the amount of power abuse that goes on in the world. But just because there are individuals who abuse their power, that doesn't mean that the rest of us should become power phobic. It just means that abuse of power is not the right way to utilize power.
Yeah, nor is abdication of power, which I see all day long just with people and their relationship or their interaction with, let's say, the medical system. There's such an abdication of power in regards to our own bodies. And I'm devoted to elevating that experience for people.
Ditto.
Yeah, and that's a wonderful clarification. We can't really say that too much because we have a tendency in our culture, in our teaching and training, to categorize or dichotomize things. We see things as black and white, and as soon as we want to say, this use of this tool was bad, okay, let's never pick this tool up again, that's a really silly way to live your life. It's just a tool, and any powerful tool can be used in any number of ways to reach all kinds of different results. And in this work, I love the way the gentleman that channeled the Way of Mastery talks about it in some of his darshans. He says, look, we'll give you some exercises in the Way of Mastery that will help you dismantle your ego, right? Put it in the right place, help you understand its true nature. please understand, you will never dismantle your ego. In the first place, it's because the you that thinks it wants to dismantle something is the ego and not your heart consciousness, right? You want to murder what you don't understand or what you think produced a negative result in your life, so that'll never work. And in the second place, it's a part of your existence. It's a useful tool. It's like, how effective is it to cut off your hand? Yes. So it's a good reminder. We're not here to villainize the conscious logical mind or the intellect or the ego. We're just here to understand its proper role in a balanced approach to life.
Yeah, exactly.
And that really reminds me of something that's emphasized a lot in A Course in Miracles, which is, in the terminology of A Course in Miracles, it's right-minded ego versus wrong-minded ego. And that those are just shorthand terms for ego that is the tail wagging the dog, like we've been talking about, or ego that is harnessed for the use of higher love and wisdom in the physical universe, and that shift from ego being the boss to ego being a conduit or a servant is kind of the bridge between Homo sapiens, where we are human animals, and Homo spiritus, where we are embodying higher love and wisdom.
Yes, where we're actually the instrument or the vehicle through which the life force from the heart of life, right, the love, wisdom, and power of life, the wellspring, is flowing through us as us.
Well, and the Way of Mastery uses that exact image, that the more you recognize and use these tools, the more you will become a clear, open conduit for the Christ mind or the creative force or the capital L love energy to to be embodied in the physical realm.
And what I found in my practice with this, Tim, is that it's so much better than my ego being in command or in the driver's seat, and that the more I direct myself to this, to be this open vessel, the more my mind, my ego mind, sits next to me in the co-pilot seat and is in awe of the flow.
Yes.
Which,
and that's part of... Go ahead. Go ahead, Tim.
Let me just do this first, David, because then you can jump right in. This leads me to think exactly of the Star Wars analogy or metaphor that you were talking about in your other podcast about evil, and the idea that when I first start out and they put the hood over my eyes and say, now fight, the zapping robot blindfolded, this is the most awkward thing ever. How can I do this without my eyes, right? But then when I learn to just get in the flow, if I'm the Jedi, then that's the best way to be. Lead with the heart energy and let the other senses be an auxiliary amplifier or tool. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, no, I love that you brought up Star Wars, and I'll take it a step further and tie it in with something else. In Star Wars, of course, the framing is around what's called in Star Wars the Force, which in essence is the one thing. It's just another term for universal love and wisdom and higher power. And the Force can be utilized as a Jedi, which is utilizing the Force in service of love and wisdom, and it can be used as a Sith, like Darth Vader in service of harm and
or just the accumulation of more power.
Right, and that's also true about technology. A lot of people that I talk to have come to think of technology as anti-spiritual, and it's not the technology that's anti-spiritual, it's how the technology is or isn't being used that could block spiritual expression in the world. But technology itself is neutral, and we can utilize technology as a tool and as Jedi, or the technology can become the boss of us, in which case we become Sith.
Yeah, that's so good. And, you know, so the Taoist philosophy, which, so I'm drawing on Chinese medicine philosophy again, before there was the two, which is the masculine and the feminine, there was just the one, hence the one thing, right? But then in order to have this physical experience, there was the two, and this is the masculine and feminine, the yin and the yang, the alpha and the omega, and that's the force here on Earth, right? And David, you had mentioned earlier about higher divine masculine and higher divine feminine, and the latest Star Wars, you know, we had this badass woman, girl, or whatever age she was, and what she was exhibiting was both, and this is the divine feminine, both gentle and fierce. And in my experience of the fierce, it's fierceness for life, and it's the only energy that can stand up to evil.
As fierceness for life?
Yes.
Say again?
You're saying the only energy that can stand up to evil is fierceness for life?
Well, it's just the light force. And you know, if there's a lot of evil, we're going to need to draw on the fierce part of our light force, right? Like Star Wars example. But in my knowing, light or light force, which is every particle and wave of the universe anyway, right, is the only energy that, we're this conversation is about each one of us accessing that and intentionally, consciously drawing it into ourselves in order to, you know, be an anchor or a steward or a center of this light, which is the only energy that can stand up to evil, is what I was saying.
And just to be even a step more explicit, fierceness for life, as we're talking about it, is not attack or anger. It's love-driven passion.
It is.
That's the clarification that I was hoping you'd make, because in my listening to your conversations, there's nothing about violence or hatred or condemnation. It's all about the most powerful of all. The only true energy is love, and what we experience as less than love is consciousness misdirecting that creative energy. The other thing I wanted to mention, just because people might be tuning into this and think we're making all this stuff up about Star Wars, the people who wrote it consulted with Joseph Campbell and had been devotees of his work, and it's intentional that the Force mimics higher consciousness, love, just energy that can be used in one way or another, and that we make a choice. And throughout the stories, except the ones that get, you know, a little bit distorted, the primary thing in the Star Wars movies is, what are you going to choose? Whose side are you going to be on? You're going to be on the side of love, or you're going to be on the side of something less than love?
Right.
Yeah.
And so, yes, George Lucas is a student of Joseph Campbell, but beyond only Campbell, he's a student of archetypal psychology and the hero's journey. And that wisdom is what informed the story arc of Star Wars and informed the creation of the characters in Star Wars.
Exactly.
Yeah. And, you know, that place, Tim, you're talking about the choice. What if we've just practiced choosing fear for so long that it seems like that is the only choice? You know, it does seem that way, but when one steps on the path of the type of stuff we're talking about, there's the realization it isn't the only choice. And then we just get to build the muscle of choosing love over and over and over, and letting it provide evidence for our mind, who's still going to be hooked into thinking fear is the only option, and all of the cohorts of fear, doubt and worry and anxiety and lack and limitation and all the things that our being finally realizes, and it settles somewhere deep in ourselves that, oh, it is about love. In fact, every cell of my being is filled with that light which carries love and cannot be separated from each other. And that's a good place to recognize.
And
exactly.
To piggyback further on that, I think it might be useful for us to also insert a comment about the right use and wrong use of meditation and prayer and things like that. I see a lot of people doing really, really devoted meditation or prayer practices in specific segments of time during their day, and then they go through the rest of their day in a different state of consciousness than the one that they're accessing while they're doing structured or devoted meditation or prayer sessions. And practicing choosing love over fear is something that's done with each breath, not only while meditating or praying.
Exactly.
That's the same experience and knowledge we have here, is that, as I mentioned earlier, the Way of Mastery invites us to do this prior to every breath, to recognize we can call on the Holy Spirit, or we can call on the Christ mind, or we can call on the one thing prior to every breath. And if we do that, we'll wake up to the recognition that the person in front of us is not a stranger. It's a fellow being of brilliance and light. And if something less than brilliance and light and love is coming out of them, it only means they've either temporarily forgotten or yet to discover their brilliance. There is no difference.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Every communication is either an expression of love or a call for love.
Right.
Exactly.
And you've mentioned the Christ mind a few times, Tim, and I don't know if you all talk about this in your groups. But one of the things I think has gotten distorted about the Christ mind is that it isn't available to every human, and it is. It's like that Jesus in his time on earth, and who is now an ascended master, his message has gotten, pretty distorted, I think, because he said very clearly, I'm exempling this. This is what you shall do too. And the division between who we are as individuals and that capacity has been filled in with so much non-truth. And I just would love for each listener to go into their heart and ask about that for themselves, because it's available to each one of us. Not only is it available, it's kind of the reason we're here, is to access that part of ourselves. Christ is not Jesus's last name. It's a consciousness that we all have access to. And I would love for people to, bridge that gap.
Well, that's exactly in line with what the Way of Mastery is promoting, that this book, this series of 3 books, several other books that were written around it, have as their goal birthing many, many people who are giving birth to the Christ mind consciousness at the same time on the planet.
And that takes us from unripe to ripe, wouldn't you say? I mean, comes full circle to how we started our conversation. When we're not connected to this Christ mind or this consciousness, we're unripe. It's just that. But we get to ripen ourselves or blossom ourselves into the fullness of that consciousness. And that's the work.
Exactly. David, you were going to say something?
Let's see. What was I going to say? About the Christ mind. I don't know whether there are some people who are listening to this episode who recoil at the word Christ, but what I would offer about that as a Jew is that if I associate Christ with a particular theological orientation in conventional Christianity, I can understand why some people recoil at the word Christ. If I understand Christ in the ways that we're talking about, having to do with a state of consciousness that transcends all religious paths, that unites all religious paths, but not unites in an evangelical way, but that just reminds us of universal wisdom, then the emotional charge connected to the word Christ can be reduced and hopefully fully eliminated.
Exactly. That's the message. This is not a person. This is a state of consciousness, a level of connectedness to the one mind that is available to all, and that's the goal. And that's the goal of all of the work in the Christ Mind writings.
And that's the healing. It's a healing too, because we've been, I don't know, I guess I can say unhealed. This is the disconnection, the original wound of disconnection is because we've been divested from the Christ consciousness. And to come back to a relationship and an understanding in our mind and our body and our life with it is a healing. It's the deepest healing, I think.
Agreed. and it's in these teachings that Dave is calling the perennial wisdom, love is the only thing that heals, and love in one of the lessons from the Way of Mastery is titled "Love Heals All Things."
Yes.
And so not only does it heal, some would say it's the only thing. It is all there is. Yes. It is what people call God. It's what they call the one thing. It's everything as energy, and when it's experienced without the veils of hurt and trauma and prejudice and the perception, there's this old adage that says, "Oh, the tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive, to tell a lie," right? Well, then I got into this work, and I'm finding out about how active the process of perception is, and how none of us just open our eyes and see what's there. We only see what our mind, our history, our language, our consciousness allows us to create as pictures in our mind. So we're very actively creating our perception all the time. And that's what's called the veils, right? That's what keeps us from seeing the radiant, shimmering radiance, as the Way of Mastery calls it, that is everything and everyone that you interact with. So then after a while in this work, I came to talk about how, the tangled web we weave when first we practice to perceive. And if we can start dismantling our judgments, which only come from perceptions, and questioning our perceptions and asking to be shown, where's the real love, light, God, Christ-mindedness in this situation, we can have an entirely different experience of life.
Yeah. And what you just described is the essence of anointing. It's to choose from the divine, to respond from holiness consciousness. And the reason I'm bringing up anointing is because the word Christ comes from the Greek word Christos, and Christos means to anoint.
Yeah, and Dr. Michael Rice were on the call, he'd say the buttered one. Because they would anoint with a sacred oil or butter.
Right. All of this is really only available in the present moment, isn't it? Like that is the what do they call the needle that a camel can't get through? I can't remember how they say that in the Testament. You probably know, Tim. But it's only available in the present. That shimmering present light.
Radiant, right.
And radiant light. And I also wanted to say a little something about love, because, our human mind, and it's been so programmed into us culturally, when we hear the word love, we think romantic love, right? Generally speaking. And really, we're talking about something that's way beyond that. We're talking about the thing that weaves everything together in the universe. It's the entire fabric of the universe. And I might be biased when I say this next thing, but it's the way that I've been able to access this broader scope of love that we're talking about beyond romantic love. It includes everything, right? The broader scope of love is by way of light, because light is something that's a little bit more tangible, and I know that it carries love, and when I call that light, I call it in by way of a waterfall through the top of my head to fill my whole body and my heart, overflow from my heart, then I can actually access it. And so, because I know that light and love cannot be separated, it's the particle and the wave, then to touch into love in a present moment, and to see that radiance in every particle of life, that's the light right there.
Mm-hmm. And this is, to tie this back in with what you were touching on a moment ago, Laurie, about the biblical phrasing, has to do with the eye of the needle, and the actual wording, or at least one of the wordings, is straight is the gate. Not straight as in S-T-R-A-I-G-H-T, but S-T-R-A-I-T, which means narrow. Narrow is the gate. Narrow is the way. That it's not a kind of narrowness that imprisons or constricts us. It's a narrowness that says anything that is beyond love and wisdom and higher power is not useful, and the path of higher love and wisdom and power in this physical universe is a very narrow path. There, if we like with power, if we do power abuse, or if we do power abdication, where we disown our power, that's outside of the gate. The gate is narrow. Higher use of power is very freeing, but it's a narrow path that's between power abuse and power abdication, for example.
That's brilliant, honey. That's brilliant, if I may say.
Well, yeah, and it goes along with the concept that you can't leave a finger outside of heaven. You have to be all in. Another way Guy Finley talks about it is he says, you can't truly love life at the same time you don't like or want any aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand that you're judging anything is the opposite of love. It's the opposite of the process of forgiveness. And in this work, the process of forgiveness means to dismantle perception, dismantle judgment. It's a complete inside job, has nothing to do with anyone or anything outside of us.
Right.
It's an energy management tool to get rid of any energy that I download or hold on to that's less than love.
Yes. And we can't do that work, in my very deep knowing, without the connection to the one thing. That's the connection that actually heals the forgiveness and heals and forgives and
right.
transmutes
so,
that energy into something.
Stop right there. Stop right there.
Okay.
You're so right on. And if Dr. Michael Rice were here, he'd say, look, you've got this 9-bit mind, right? Harvard research says that in 1/25th of a second, we've got 9 bits of information we can be aware of consciously. Our brain is processing 10,000 bits of energy, and probably 20 trillion bits are hitting our senses. Now, if you think, since you understand that you're getting these energies that are on the mark and off the mark that are passed down 3 and 4 generations, if you think you're going to wipe that out with your conscious logical mind, you're mistaken. Because as you're processing 9 bits or 15 bits, let's say you're a genius and you're going to do 20 bits at a time, your unconscious mind's processing millions, right? So you need what they call the super processor. You need the Holy Spirit. You need these latent neurostructures implanted in you by the Creator, or the one thing, that will guide you to truth and happiness and break off the effects of your errors in thought if you will just ask it to.
Yes.
Which is just what you're saying. It's just what you're saying, Laurie.
And for more motivation or inspiration for people to choose this, what we're talking about, there is a completely different set of chemistry that gets released from our brain when we choose to take that moment and connect into the superconscious mind or the divine mind or higher intelligence or whatever words we want to put to that. That chemistry is healing, restorative. I mean, people are all into anti-aging and they're doing all this stuff. This is the real anti-aging chemistry, right? And the opposite is also true. When we're cowering in our fear, our anxiety, or our judgments, then there's a completely opposite set of chemistry that gets released from our brain, and it's corrosive, it's inflammatory, and it tears our system down. And people wonder why chronic disease is rampant.
Absolutely. And if I can double back to what we were touching on a minute or two ago about split-mindedness, one foot in the ego, the wrong-minded ego mind, the separated mind, and 1 foot in the spiritual consciousness. That kind of split-mindedness doesn't work. It's actually a form of bargaining. It's a form of bargaining that says, well, I really like this idea of higher consciousness, and I want to live in it, but I don't want to have to give up my ego or my seemingly separate sense of self in order to do that. And so I'm going to try to kind of live in both states at the same time. And it just doesn't work.
Right, yeah. It's actually a recipe for exhaustion.
Yeah.
Exactly. And many times over. Amen, Amin. So I'm looking at the clock and realizing we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left. So I was hoping to stop earlier and say, how about we throw it open for questions? But it's 5 or 6 minutes. Let's have you guys talk a little bit about, or you two people, talk a little about what you're doing other than the One Thing podcast and how people can get a hold of you if they want to connect with you more.
Sure. Go ahead,
Sure
Laurie.
thing. So I think the easiest way to direct people to more, if they would like, is I have a website. It's www.createtohealstudio.com. And the thing I'd like to direct people, I mean, there's lots of stuff on there, so, have at it. Go for whatever resonates. But at the bottom of the homepage, on the right-hand side, there's a free gift, and it's a 5-part mini class on how each of the parts are the power of grounding, the power of connecting, the power of being embodied, the power of being present, and the power of purpose. And it's all about the light force that we've touched on in our conversation here, and how to. It's a foundational piece, I think, for any spiritual path. Even people who are farther down the road, I think we forget this core basic piece. So bringing ourselves back to this in a sort of simple and clear practice is something I feel is vital. And honestly, I weave the one thing into everything I do. So, when you say something else besides the one thing, it's like, well, I can't leave that touchstone. So,
well, I was referencing the One Thing podcast, not the one thing
itself. No, I
know.
You are right. You did say that, 100%. So, what about you, honey?
Well, yeah, I'll say that in a quick moment, but the Tot Podcast has its own website as well, which is simply totpodcast.net. The project that I'm most focused on of all of the different hats I wear is called the Center for Enlightened Self-Sovereignty, and that's a community and training process that equips leaders and influencers with the capacity to have the level of positive impact that they want to have in helping to bring about an enlightened future for humanity. And the information website about the Center for Enlightened Self-Sovereignty, which basic membership is free, is the CESS, THECESS, for Center for Enlightened Self-Sovereignty.com, thecess.com.
And David, thank you for being willing to give up a couple hours of your time prior to this. And we have recorded 2 episodes of the On Your Mind podcast just about the Center for Enlightened Self-Sovereignty, and they will air, barring any technical glitches, on March 5th and March 12th. So people can access that through the onyourmindpodcast.org. And of course, when that launches, David, you'll get all of the appropriate links to promote that on your site or your social media as well.
Which, of course, I'll be doing just as I'll be promoting this episode of MindShifters Radio.
Likewise.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Any closing comments before we make the transition to our second hour here?
Well, I just want to thank you again for having us on your show, and I really hope that the big takeaway that your listeners have been taking from this episode is that real truth, spiritual truth, is universal. It's not, as I often say, only the metaphors are changed to protect the fearful. Don't get lost in the differences in language and wording and in metaphors, because the perennial wisdom is the perennial wisdom no matter how it's worded. That's the takeaway that I would offer from this episode.
Yeah, and I think I would offer just a pause. There's such a simple potency in just pausing, like you mentioned, Tim, that you're doing in your work. And if you can, put your hand on your heart and just drop in and ask.
What are your takeaways, Tim?
Well, pretty much ditto for all of this. The idea that the capital T truth is the capital T truth and doesn't change based on what people say about it or try to write about it. And it has to be experienced in the moment, as Laurie was talking about earlier. And I love the Sylvia Boorstein, Jewish Buddhist grandmotherly type, who says whenever she's upset, she puts her hand over her heart space and talks to herself lovingly, and she says, "Sylvia, sweetheart, you're in pain. Take a few deep breaths, relax, then we'll look at what's going on. Then we'll decide what to do. But for now, Timmy, sweetheart, you're in pain." And right now, as I pause with my hand over my heart space, I'm not in pain, I am in delight. And thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much for the work you're doing. And I look forward to our next contact.
Beautiful. Thank you for the work you're doing.
I will remind us all that we come from love. We're made of this stuff we